Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Energy RX. I'm really excited for this next guest, and I'm really excited for you to get to sit in her presence. This next guest is Marisa Weppner, who is also known as Radha. I may not be saying that correctly. Is it Radha or Radha?
Yeah, you're saying it right. Radha.
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 So this beautiful name was actually given to her by Ram Dass, which I think is pretty amazing. Um, Marisa has been working with self awakening and transformation for more than 20 years in so many settings. She's a facilitator at the Esalen Institute. She has a yoga studio. She's been practicing for more than 20 years at her studio named Sage in Boise, Idaho. She leads psychedelic journeys. She is a coach. She is a therapist at the Boise ketamine clinic. She brings healing at festivals and retreats. I mean, the list really goes on and on with the medicine this beautiful being is bringing to the world. So I'm really excited to get to hear a little bit of her story and some of her wisdom on this journey of healing, transformation, connecting to the oneness that we all are that she has been on. So I'm really grateful to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Appreciate the introduction. And I'm really happy that you invited me to meet your audience.
I am so excited. So I have to tell everybody the way I found her is I work, I do a lot of healing work myself, and I have these two very long playlists that I always put on shuffle. And Radha is this movie, Magic for Mushroom, is her fiance's band, East Forest. And I have so much of that music woven into my playlist. And I've always called it Divine DJ, but I was just heard a new term, which is Spirit Shuffle, because literally the most perfect songs come on at the perfect time. But his music in particular comes on in these incredible times and like crying and tears and this it's unbelievable what happens with this music. So when I saw on my Instagram that the movie was coming out, I had to go and see it. But then so prominently featured was Radha and her presence that was just so beautiful and healing and anchoring that I was really locked into her during this movie. And so I was just so excited when she said that she would come on. So with that, knowing a little bit how I found you with that, I'd love to take it back to the beginning a little bit with you. You have been teaching yoga for more than 20 years and facilitating healing retreats. What moved you into this work?
I mean, if we're taking it back, I'm from Florida. I was raised in Daytona Beach, on the beach, like during like 80s, 90s MTV spring break era,
Okay.
wild.
Mm-hmm.
And we were Roman Catholic, my family was. So through the Catholic Church, all the way through confirmation, which was like a big drudgery as a child, going to
Yes.
Sunday school and church and feeling a sense of disconnection within that. And I was just actually at a point as an early teen where I was considering, I had this sense that my word then was, because I didn't have other words at the time, was like church and religion. I had this
Mm-hmm.
sense that church and religion were somehow important.
Okay.
And I was at this point of choosing to go back to the church. We had stopped going to church when I was around 12, and my parents had divorced. And I was considering, like, I was almost ended up, let's say, like a young lifer, if you know what that is.
I don't. I don't.
It's like the Christian teens, but
Okay.
called Young Life. At least
Okay.
that's what they were called in my era. I
Okay.
almost was about to dip my toes into those waters. And what happened was, friends of mine, a new boyfriend, I was like 15 at the time, we took LSD together.
Okay.
And I hadn't had any altered state experiences prior to that, like not even
Mhm.
been high smoking weed or anything.
Okay.
And it was an interesting, not interesting is the wrong word. It was maybe fascinating that a lot of the archetype in that journey for me was God versus devil, heaven, hell. And
Mm-hmm.
I literally saw demons and entities like that. It was actually a very horrific experience. And what
During
you,
this LSD, you
oh yeah,
saw demons. Okay.
yes, during this LSD experience, let's just say it was really challenging and
Okay.
incredibly destabilizing and very difficult and painful. But I felt like coming out of that, I had this sense of, wow, there's a lot more going on than I've been clued into in my upbringing through
Right.
the church and through culture and society.
Hmm.
And I wanted to understand what reality was. What does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
What is God? Those three questions came to me as a 15-year-old as I was trying to put myself back together from that LSD experience,
Okay.
because we didn't even have the internet back then. This was
Yeah.
like my only resources were used bookstores, really.
Hmm.
There were no teachers. And I didn't have the word integration then, but that's what I was trying to do, was
Right.
reintegrate. I just knew I felt really shattered and broken, and I needed to figure that out for myself. And there was nobody that I could talk to about that. So I ended up in like the used bookstore, the section of like new age spirituality, Eastern
Hmm.
spirituality, psychology. And those became my teachers throughout my teens.
Okay.
And that, I guess that's the beginning really for me. So my whole life has from that point on been still those three questions. What does it mean to be human? And how can we be the best human possible? And what is reality? And how do we interact with that? And what is God? And how do we interact with that? How does that inform our life? And I came to yoga because I was still deep in this integration aspect, even 5 years after that. So I was like 19, 20. And I finally found yoga through a book, Richard Hittleman's 28-Day Exercise Plan, which is like a book
Okay.
from 1969 of a woman in a leotard doing yoga poses.
Okay.
And I started doing yoga on my own in my bedroom. And I was also studying psychology, again, from these same interests. And I was
Hmm.
recognizing how this short little practice of like 15 minutes that I was doing by myself, after a while, maybe a week or so, I noticed how I was changing my habits and behaviors and thinking minds without efforting. I wasn't trying to make the changes that I was noticing were happening. And that was so fascinating to me, that yoga could be a tool for transformation in a really subtle way. You think you're doing this exercise or these movements, but it's affecting you on such deep levels, all levels,
Right.
your multidimensional self. So that's why when I graduated with my psychology degree, I immediately went to become a yoga teacher because I thought this could be the way that I help people. And they
Hmm.
don't even know that we're really going to be doing as much as we're going to be doing.
Right. Now, is this still in Florida where are you
Mm-hmm.
still in Florida at this
No,
time?
then I was in college. So I
Mhm.
graduated from the University of South Florida, New College in
Okay.
Sarasota. And then I went to Costa Rica in 2002. I had planned an entire trip to India. I thought I'm going to graduate, I'm going to travel the world, be like bohemian, India girl for a while and Southeast Asia and all of that,
Hmm.
and go to these different ashrams. And I had this whole trip of all these ashrams. There was this great book I had found called From Here to Nirvana, which like
Okay.
outlined all the ashrams in India. And I was just going by this book and going to find a teacher training. But that September was September 11th, right
Oh,
before I was supposed to go to
okay.
that part of the world on my
Yeah.
own as a 22-year-old. And so I decided to not go because it felt that at that time it was really unknown what was going to happen in the world, and particularly that part of the world, traveling on my own as a young female. And so I
Right.
thought, okay, well, what did I really want to do on this world travel trip? And it was get my yoga teacher training. And I just Googled, this was early Google too, like yoga international training, something like that. And the Nosara Yoga Institute came up. And that's Nosara, Costa Rica, that a lot of us know now is this kind of destination spot in
Right.
Costa Rica for yoga and wellness and
Right.
surfing. But at the time, it was not like it is today.
It was probably pretty unknown.
It was very
Yeah.
unknown. It was very unknown. It was dirt roads. There was the Yoga Institute. There was like a couple hotels, and it was mostly jungle.
Okay.
And that's where I found my teachers who, meeting Don and Amba Stapleton, I just told Amba this the other day. That's probably the most impactful moment of my whole life in a positive direction.
Wow.
Yeah. Being there,
Mm.
I remember sitting there in the Mandir, the temple, the Palapa temple, and just feeling like somehow I ended up at like a university of consciousness. Like I was learning from them how to become the best human possible and what does it mean to be human, or what is reality, what is God. They were answering all these questions for me through their style of teaching and their wisdom, and it's informed me in so
Yeah.
many ways.
And their
I
frequency,
Yeah,
probably,
their
just what they were
frequency,
emitting.
their intelligence, their wisdom, their lineage, just yeah. I love them so so
Yeah.
so much. So grateful for them.
So do you still work with them in Costa Rica?
Yeah, Don, he passed away about a week ago, a year ago. He had his
Okay.
Mahasamadhi. And Amba, I'm still very close with. Right before Don left his body a year ago, I organized a retreat. I reached out to Amba, his wife, and I'd said prior to that, like 6 months prior to that, I said, we all have to come. We all
Mm.
have to come and have a retreat with you
Yeah.
and Don. We have to do it. We have to do it. She's
Yeah.
like, okay. And so we organized this legacy retreat, which brought together about 50 of the past students. They had been teaching for 40 years, and they hadn't been teaching in the past 5. And Don hadn't been with any of his students really
Oh,
for many years. And I just said, we have to get together. We have to be with him again. And we did. And then a month later, he passed.
how beautiful that you were able to have that, hold that space for him and for him to give his final sort of, gifts to all of you.
Oh, it was that will go down as probably one of the most touching experiences because he had developed dementia on
Mhm.
Alzheimer's, so he wasn't really able to communicate
Right.
and hadn't been with many people in a while.
Hmm.
And his whole life was spent as a teacher, and it
Right.
just felt like he needed us again, like he needed his students with him again,
Yeah. That's
which he
amazing.
hadn't had.
Yeah, that's amazing. That Alzheimer's and dementia, I have a little experience. My father-in-law was a really brilliant man, and he came up with sort of the mathematical equation for um, he changed everything from analog to digital is what he did. He's known as the father of digital sound, and he got early onset Alzheimer's. But what was so fascinating was that we'd be at a table and he would be talking in ones and zeros. I'm like, I know he's saying something. He just doesn't have the mechanism somehow for the words to come out. But he has another language that he speaks that he knows how to speak.
Mm.
So it was really such a, heart wrenching, and sort of there was beauty in it also.
There is. I mean, he became so soft, so
Mm,
gentle. And he always was. But there was a reserve part of him. I remember feeling as his student that then at this later stage in his life, he was just all available. Kind of like Ram Dass was at the end of his life, too. It's just, the veil is so thin.
yeah, that's so. I'd love to ask you about. We're kind of jumping ahead, but we're in this vein. So I mentioned that I've worked with this music, and particularly when these recordings. So what I had believed about the music was those were just sort of taken,
East
those
Forest. Yeah.
from that those were just sampled from lectures or something else. I had no clue that this was intentional.
Mm. Mm.
So it was so amazing for me to see what had happened. Can you share anything about that experience with Ram Dass?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, yeah, jumping forward, I had a
Mm-hmm.
whole life and marriage and children, and
Yeah.
that fell apart around 2017. And I had met East Forest a few years prior through mutual friends. So we
Mm-hmm.
were mutual friends for a number of years, and we would see each other at different festivals across the world or different events or different, just similar social circles. Actually, out
Mm-hmm.
of the psychedelic world is where it emerged for both of us early on. Then our friendship, and then we were both divorcing at the same time.
Wow.
And so he basically was just like, this is gonna happen. And I remember being like, no, 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 no. Like, I don't know what I want with my life. I can't, I felt like this strong urge, like I needed to be really clear, like, we're not getting into a relationship. You
Okay.
have to know that. We've only been in a relationship. That's the only thing that's happened is we were in a relationship. And getting together, we started to get to know each other. And we both shared a love of Ram Dass coming into our relationship. And
Okay.
we had a really beautiful synchronistic moment too with Maharaji, Ram Dass's teacher,
Oh,
even bringing us further together when we were first getting together, where I'll just share this story because it's so beautiful. When I was starting to divorce, it's a process, and I got this apartment nearby, and I was still living at home, but doing the separation. And
yeah.
a friend asked if they could stay with me as they were coming through town because we often hosted people, my ex-husband and I, at our home, but somebody was staying with us. And I was like, well, I guess I have this other place you could stay, but actually nobody knows yet I'm getting divorced, but I do have an apartment. So sure, you can stay in this spot
Okay.
when you're coming through town. So he came into town and did his thing. I didn't know what he was doing and came back and stayed there. And then eventually I went back to the apartment, and he had left me a present as a thank you. And on the table was a t-shirt that said, "Be here now." And it was a little tiny pendant of Maharaji, a little necklace pendant. I didn't know it, but he was going to the Ram Dass retreat in Maui and coming
Okay.
back. This was just, again, another friend. And so I was like, oh, and I put this pendant on my necklace. I was like, I'm going to wear this. I like this.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to work with this relationship. And so then a little bit of time goes by, a month or so or more, and I was with East Forest, and we were sitting together, and he was saying something like, when the universe gives you a sign that this is the way you're supposed to go, you have these symbols and synchronicities. And I was like, yeah, I totally understand that. And then he looks down and he sees my Maharaji pendant, and he starts weeping. And he was just like shocked and stunned. He's like, I can't believe that's on your chest right now, that you're wearing a picture of him. I just printed out a picture of Maharaji and put him on my wall and asked him to help me because he was going through his own divorce and really struggling too. And so that moment was a big one for the both of
Oh,
us.
yeah.
And then so time goes on, and he's working on a new album, and he says, I want to work with Ram Dass. I'm thinking about recording him. And because everything, and he explains this in the movie with his East Forest music, everything he records, he doesn't pull a sample of a cricket off the internet or a sample of birds or a sample of whatever. It's all his recordings. And that is an aspect for him that's important to the work that he creates, and just keeping
Yeah.
it alive and organic and the transmission real.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when he said, I want to work with Ram Dass, I just looked at him and I said, you're going to do that, and I'm going to go with you when you go record him. And he's like, okay. I was like, yeah. So yes to this.
Yeah.
And so he was working with Raghu, who manages the Love Serve Remember Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
Ram Dass's foundation. And Raghu at first said, yeah, we've got 50,000 hours of recorded Ram Dass. Take whatever you want. And Krishna said, I thank you, but it's important, I think, that I record him. I want him to speak for himself. I don't want to just choose how to represent him. I want it to come from Ram Dass directly, and also feeling it's important to capture him at this moment in time in his life and what he wants to say for himself in this
Yeah.
moment in time. And even if maybe I come there and I don't get maybe the material that I need, I feel like if we're making this work together, it's important to see each other eye to eye, soul to soul.
Right.
And so Raga was like, you got it. You can come to Maui. And then we were just like giddy, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're going to Maui. and we're going to meet Ram Dass. That's just like meeting, I don't know. It's like,
There's no one else. I don't think there's a comparison really.
there's no comparison. East Forest, he'll say when he first walked in, it's like, for him, it was like being in the spiritual White House. Like, I can't believe
I'm
I'm here.
sure it felt like that.
Yeah. So
I'd
we
be
were,
more excited than the White House.
yeah,
Be
more
familiar, yeah.
exciting. So he actually went a couple days ahead of me because at the time my son was graduating kindergarten. And I was like,
Mhm.
I don't want to miss Benji's kindergarten graduation. So
Yeah.
you go and I'll meet you. And
Mhm.
so he did his first set of recordings by himself. And then I was there for the second day that we went, and we spent a few hours with him in his study. And he would just talk and talk, and not talk and talk like rapidly, but just he wanted to be in that space because he was such an orator.
Yeah.
He was such a lecturer. He was so eloquent. That was one of his masterpieces, was his ability to communicate.
Right.
Yeah. And so everything that you hear on the Ram Dass East Forest album was recorded then. And Krishna, or East Forest, he really didn't edit it at all either. It was just editing it in a way of like putting it together, or putting music with it, but he didn't change words or make it sound any
Right.
different than Ram Dass was delivering it.
I'm so glad that he didn't, just from personal experience using that music, the power, the healing that, I mean, this may sound crazy, but I mean, I haven't met him in person, but I sometimes, when that happens and it comes on at this perfect time, it's like I feel the being come forward in a way
Mm-hmm.
to help with the healing.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm getting chills as you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a picture of Ram Dass right now as you're saying that.
See.
So I looked up, and here he is.
I love it. I love it. Actually, you know what? I have so many in my office here. I have so many like saints and like
Yeah.
so much going on in here. Because he comes in and works with me so much
You
through the
have to,
music.
yeah. And
I need it.
Maharaji.
I'm getting them both. That's
Mm-hmm.
happening. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for that. They will be coming in soon.
But
I
I
need them.
felt that too when we were listening to even the early recordings of editing, and so much that East Force works on, he plays for me, and it's like, what do you think? What should I
Yeah.
do? How is this? How is that? This is where it's going, and I give feedback and process, and the transmission was so pure, big, powerful. We would just start crying so many
Yeah.
times. We would just start weeping, just. And still now, today, there's one song that he plays live. What is it? It'll come to me. But even still now, every time I start crying, every time, and I've heard it so many times, it
Yeah.
just hits me and opens me.
So I'm so glad you're saying that, because I have that. I mean, I'm not even hearing it live, but when I'm working with it, the person will start crying. I will
Yeah.
start like, because the energy that it is a transmission, and that's when I feel this being. And quite honestly, I mean, why I'm so excited to have you on is I didn't realize you were part of those recordings. So East Forest and you on this quantum level are
Mm.
participating in this healing on this level. So it's just so much bigger than I think we even can comprehend. In
Yeah.
fact,
Yeah. I hear that. And it's funny because East Forest in our world with he and I, it's just him. And yet I'm so integrated into every aspect of what he does. And for
yeah,
so much of what he does, I'm there supporting him and doing it. And even, going back to that time when we were with Ram Dass, I remember he got there first, like I said, and we were talking on the phone. He's like, I ran into a guy who said that Ram Dass gave him a name. And I'm thinking I'm going to ask Ram Dass for a name. And I was like, yeah, babe, do it. That's a great idea. And I
mhm.
wasn't thinking I wanted a name because I had already gotten a name from my yoga teacher, Don, and Baba Haridas had given me a name. I'm like, I'm name rich. I've got lots of names. And, but I was just like, sure, definitely ask him for a name if you want that. And I remember we got done recording that second day, and had gone over a little late. And his caretaker, this woman, Dasima, She's like an older German grandma who's kind of intense. And Krishna definitely made me afraid of Dasima. Like Dasima's fierce and she's going to kick us out if we,
And she's the
you know,
caretaker.
break any rules. So I was like, okay, I'll be on my best behavior. So we got done and I went to go tell Dasima, like, we're finished, you know, like we just got done, you know, now we're just going to clean up. And so I left the room. And when I came back in, Krishna had been kneeling next to Ram Dass and he stood up. And then I sat in the chair across from Ram Dass where Krishna had been sitting when he was doing the recording. And then Krishna was just packing up the music gear. And Ram Dass was staring out into the ocean. And then a minute goes by or so, and then Ram Dass turns towards Krishna and he says, and I'm saying Krishna, he turns towards East Forest and he says, Krishna. And he's like, oh yeah, they're chanting in the living room. They're chanting to Krishna because somebody was chanting in the living room. And Ram Dass just like, and he says Krishna again. And East Forest just looks back and he's confused. And I look at him and I'm like, he's telling you your name.
Yeah.
And then he felt that as a really powerful moment, just of the gift of that. But then he says, Krishna? Like Sting or Cher? Like just Krishna? And Ram Dass is like, just Krishna. He wanted to be clear. He says he didn't want to get down the road later and somebody say like, well, Ram Dass was actually trying to say you were
Right.
Krishna, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so he clarified. He's like, I am certain
wanted
of this
to clarify, and he asked directly. And I always thought it was funny that he said just Krishna, because like just Krishna is like
just
Jesus or
yeah.
whatever, just Buddha. And I knew in that moment also when he said it, as soon as he said to Krishna, your name is Krishna, I thought to myself, he's about to tell me my name is Radha. And then he turned back to me and he looked at me and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, you are Radha. And he slapped his thigh and then he just started laughing like he thought it was the funniest thing in the whole world. And then we just laughed because I knew that Radha and Krishna were beloveds. They were partners.
Oh. Okay.
And so from that moment, it became this divine partnership, really, that we started living into and stepping into. And for both of us, too, having been divorced, we came into our relationship with a different sense of sacredness for partnership and, you know, learning from past mistakes and maturing and valuing connection. And so trying to be next level partners with each other, but that even then amplified it to such a greater level. And for me in particular, because of my upbringing and my childhood, I'd always maintained such an independent sense of self, really keeping a lot of me for me, not feeling very safe, really trusting or really merging or being fully dependent or with or codependent or inner being or whatever it might be. And with Radha Krishna, I felt like Ram Dass was saying, you can be a different kind of partner. You can be like Radha and you can be fully devoted. You can trust in being this with each other. Here, I'll show you this too. I've got Radha Krishna right here. If you're not familiar, Krishna, he's often blue and playing a flute. And then when you see him, there's like a woman on his arm, like dangling on him, and that's Radha.
Oh, that's so perfect. I mean, that's perfect. It's amazing. That's amazing. I also think what's so amazing about this piece of the story is that, so we're going to rewind a little bit. This is still early in your relationship, right?
Very
So
early.
this is not, you haven't been together for years and years at this point. You've been given
No.
this divine partnership name sort of in like the, very early part of your relationship.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. It was less than a year that we'd been doing this dance together.
Okay.
And
Yeah. And then you ended up, I think, really having at the end of the movie, it shows that there was this kind of full circle moment when you came back to Maui to Ram Dass's retreat.
yeah, that's not in the movie actually. That was just a couple months ago.
Was that not in the movie? How
Mm-mm.
do I know this?
It was on my Instagram feed.
What was it in the credits? Maybe
I
I
don't think so. No, no.
I don't think I saw this in your Instagram. This is okay. That's not in the movie because I
Mm-mm.
okay. Well, so
Mm-mm.
share the story because this is pretty amazing.
Yeah, so then years go by, and Krishna makes this movie, and so this past summer, right now it's October.
Hmm.
And so in the summer, I remember like I was planning on going to Burning Man this year, and Krishna won't go to Burning Man with me. So I'm like, I got a camp, I got a free ticket, I paid my dues, I got my bike ready, I've got all my outfits ready. I had everything dialed and lined up, everything you could possibly think of to go back to Burning Man. And then, like 2, 3 weeks before, he's like, "Well, we were invited to go to Maui to the Ramdas Film Fest," and I was like, "Okay." It was the weekend of Burning Man, and I'm like, "That's cool. You can do that. You can do that by yourself. That'll be fine." And then, like a day goes by, he's like, "Yeah," and we were invited to stay at Ramdas's house when we go, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, only Ramdas will
Yes,
intervene."
that's a weak spot.
He's the only thing that could have gotten me out of those plans that I had. I'm like,
Right,
all
right,
right,
right.
cancel everything.
Okay.
We're going to Maui. And so we went to Maui together and were invited to stay at Ramdas's house, which is now called Hanuman Maui. They've turned it into like they built a little mandir, a little temple for Hanuman, and then there's Maharaji and Ramdas in it too. And you can go into the study where that you see briefly in the film where we did the recording. That was Ramdas's room where he spent all of his
Mhm.
time. You can go there and be on the grounds, and they offer a lot of services throughout the week for people to come and participate in kirtans and meditations and chanting. So we were there in Ramdas's house, and he says the night before, he's like, "Let's wake up early and go into the mandir, and you can chant the Hanuman Chalisa," which is a song that I learned because of the Ramdas world. I've known a lot about bhakti and chanting and kirtan, and somehow I'd never really heard the Hanuman Chalisa until we went to the first Ramdas retreat together, which was like the May of 2018. Krishna had told me about it because when he was there with Ram Dass prior, he's like, and everybody started singing this really long chant, and I have no idea what it was, and it was wild, and it went on forever. I was just like, huh, I don't know. I don't know what that was. My first Hanuman Chalisa at the retreat with Ram Dass, he was in the hot tub surrounded by like a bunch of his caretakers, and Duncan Trussell, the comedian, was there with his wife, and they just break out into this song. Everybody knows it. And again, it goes on forever. It's very complicated. And I just thought to myself, well, I got to figure out what this is.
Yeah.
So I taught myself the Hanuman Chalisa. It's 40 verses of Sanskrit. Every sentence is different. And it goes on for about 12 minutes, 7 minutes, depending on how fast you sing it. Very complex. It took me a long time. Well, I dedicated myself to one line every day so that then I could get to this other event and sing it with them. But anyways, Krishna was like,
That's
"Let's
amazing.
let's wake up. You can sing the Chalisa and play the harmonium in the temple, and then we'll meditate." And I was like, "Really? That's what you want to do? That's what I want to do. Those are my favorite things. They aren't
Mhm.
necessarily his favorite things."
Okay.
But he's like, "Yeah, let's do that." So I'm like, "Okay." So we got up in the morning and did that in the temple, just the two of us, which was just, yeah, powerful, beautiful, full circle in so many ways. And then he presented me with a ring.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there couldn't be a more perfect way to propose to you, I feel like.
No, it was if it had been designed just for me, it would have been that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've talked about marriage over the years, and he's pretty clear that he doesn't ever want to actually marry legally. And I'm
Okay.
like, okay, we don't have to marry legally, but I still want like the pretty things that go along with being married.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right. So he made me a ring with his grandfather's railroad diamonds, as it's known in the family.
His grandfather's railroad diamond?
Yeah.
There must be a story behind that. What does that
I
mean?
don't know. I asked his mom when I saw her about a month ago, and she's actually said to me, "You don't want to know the story."
Okay. Okay.
And it's like, if you're saying that, fair enough. Yeah, let's keep it clean.
Okay. Okay. So he made you a ring, which is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And so you have a divine, I mean, it's clear that there's a divine partnership here. So
Yeah,
whether it's legal or not legal, it's beautiful. The
exactly.
story is so beautiful.
It's so miraculous. It really is. It really is. Neither of us, when we first met as friends, ever anticipated that we would end up as partners, ever,
Right.
ever, never, ever, ever.
So that's amazing. So thank you for sharing all of that story. I do want to know a little bit more about you. What I was there was some video of you in the movie where you were at the Boise ketamine clinic, I'm assuming, sitting with people. Now, I've never done ketamine myself, but as I was watching that, I thought, wow, if I were to do that, that's who I would want by my side. So so, is there anything you can talk about, like how you got involved with? I mean, clearly you had that LSD experience, and that went really, it was amazing, but it also took so long to reintegrate. So, I'm assuming there was something that drove you towards that through that, that
Well,
initial
yes.
experience.
Yeah, because of that, psychedelics had always been a part of my life and my
Hmm.
upbringing and my own personal exploration of
Hmm.
consciousness, because it is a
Yeah.
consciousness, they are consciousness tools
Right.
of understanding the self and other dimensions, or the breadth of what reality could be or what is possible. And so gradually I began to use them more and more throughout my 20s. When I say more and more, it's like here and there. Like I
Right.
would did mushrooms, and then I remember doing ayahuasca back in 2002. It was the very first time I did that.
Hmm.
And then exploring some with MDMA and pot. And I have never really been very good friends at all. That's the
Hmm.
difficult one for me. But because of my first experience with the LSD, I've only been able to have a relationship with psychedelics from a deep place of reverence. Like
Yeah.
I'm not able to really just play
Yeah.
or use them in that type of setting
Hmm.
because it doesn't go there for me. It always becomes deeply spiritual and really powerful. So I've
Hmm.
always used them as this type of tool. And then I first experienced ketamine in a somewhat more recreational setting, but found that it was really powerful in the places that it took me within myself
Hmm.
in a way that was different than others because it was gentle.
Oh, okay. So that I didn't know.
Yeah, it
So
felt
ketamine
free,
is a more gentle therapy.
gentle in that in its use medically, it's an anesthetic. So it's used in hospitals to take people all the way into unconsciousness.
Okay, I didn't know that.
It's used in surgeries.
Okay.
Or it became known in like the 70s, 60s, 70s. During the Vietnam era, they would call it the buddy drug, that every soldier would carry it with them so that if something happened to their friend soldiers, they would give them ketamine to help them relieve the pain and to go into an anesthetic state. So the
Okay.
ketamine that we use in the clinic or people use recreationally, it's called sub-anesthetic. So lower doses where you don't lose
Okay.
consciousness, but
Hmm.
because of the anesthetic quality, your physiology is relaxing. Your nervous system is relaxing. So you go into it in a very relaxed state most of the time.
Okay.
And that's where the gentleness comes, I think, because of that. Unlike mushrooms or LSD or ayahuasca or even MDMA, like when the threshold is there, like from normal waking consciousness
Hmm.
into an altered state, there's often a like, oh no, or let's have this stop, or I'm not sure if I want to do this, or abort mission type of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sensation. This doesn't really have that at all.
Okay.
And so Krishna hadn't ever had experiences with ketamine. And I remember telling him, like, no, it's actually a really powerful psychedelic and it can open up very insightful, beautiful places and do a lot of really good
Mhm.
work. And he was kind of like poo pooing it, like, whatever, that's just whatever. And I
Right.
was, and so finally somebody, I was actually a fan of his, came up to him after a show and said, I'm a ketamine therapist. And if you're ever back in town, I invite you to have a session with me if you're ever open to that. And he told me that he had had that invitation This
Hmm.
was in Denver that the invitation was. And so we were actually going into Denver. This is back in early 2021. And
Okay.
I said, "Oh, yeah, we could look up your friend and see if you wanted to try that ketamine therapy while we're here." He's like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." So we met up with the therapist at his office, and he gave us both ketamine therapy sessions together
Oh, at the same time.
the
Okay.
same time in his office with the use of lozenges, which is a common route where a lozenge dissolves in your mouth and then
Okay.
you are taken into this altered state. So we both had a lozenge experience together. And for Krishna, it was really powerful and beautiful, and for myself as well. And I remember feeling in the session, I had the insights, I could do this right now. It's like, oh, this is
Oh,
legal right now. People are doing this. I'm in a therapeutic setting right now. And all of my work prior to that in the yoga space, in the meditation space, in the therapy space was all about helping folks become better and to heal. And I was like,
yeah.
this is another route of healing with a psychedelic that I could do because it's legal right now. So I remember coming back to Boise and then just searching. The catch is who would prescribe it. You have to work with somebody that has the credentialing to write prescriptions for
Right.
ketamine and administer ketamine.
Mhm.
I don't have that as a therapist. And so I found a clinic here, the Boise Ketamine Clinic. I just reached out like a cold call and sent a cold email like, hey, this is who I am and my background. And would you be open to maybe working together and me providing ketamine therapy? And she luckily was open to it. And I was like, great. And I like to just do trainings and learn things and immerse myself. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take a training. There was one called the Through the Ketamine Training Institute with Phil Wolfson. It's like, I'm going to take this in like the spring of, actually, so no, go backwards. It was 2019 because it was the fall of 2019. And I said, I'm going to take this training in the spring of 2020 and then let's start working together. She's like,
Okay.
great. And so then, as we know, with 2020, everything canceled and nothing
Right.
happened, and the training wasn't going to happen, all the things that were going on in life. And I reached out to the clinic and I said, this isn't going to happen. The training, I don't know when it's going to be rescheduled. But if we had like our own type of training, what would you want to do so that you'd feel good working together? Because that's
Mhm.
essentially it. Like they have to feel comfortable with me or whoever they're working with because their license is on the line.
Yeah.
And she just said, well, read this book. It's called The Ketamine Papers, which I was already reading for the training, and come in and get an IV ketamine through the clinic. And then she's like, and I feel like you're already overqualified. So we'll just start. And I was like, okay, let's
Okay.
do it.
Okay. That's amazing. And so I know that it can be so helpful for depression, PTSD. I mean, so do you mostly find like what do you mostly work with ketamine? Could it be anything? Or are there certain conditions that really are impactful with it?
All of those. And what I've discovered in the past 4 years plus working with people, and I didn't have an understanding of this prior to this
Mhm.
work, is how much we're suffering from complex PTSD. So most folks have complex PTSD to different degrees, which then leads to depression or leads to anxiety. And essentially, and I'm sure you see it probably in a lot of the healing work that you do, of their people's fight flight responses
Yeah.
being stuck on fawn freeze. And
Yeah.
so most of the work is working with variations of complex PTSD. And people, they don't even know that they have that when they come in. It's this sense of, I feel stuck. I've tried all these other modalities. I've
Mhm.
tried so many other things for decades or most of my life. But the ages span. Sometimes I work with teenagers all the way to 60s or 70s, but most people middle aged,
Yeah.
and they're desperate for something to help
Yeah.
them feel differently.
This kind of so just for our listeners, like how would you describe complex PTSD?
Complex PTSD, unlike PTSD, where you think of as like the event that happened to you or the abuse that happened to you or the accident or it's like usually a pivotal thing, even though it could be long over time, like war.
Hmm.
Complex PTSD is more defined as what didn't happen to you, particularly in childhood, meaning you didn't receive safety, love, connection, support as a child.
Right.
So when we're raised in environments that feel unsafe, or we or experienced abuse or neglect, that often we develop what's called complex PTSD. And then that's again, like as a child, all that we're seeking is safety, love, I'm important, I matter,
Mm-hmm.
my needs are met.
Right.
And when we don't get that as a child, we develop strategies of how can I make it through in this unsafe environment? Maybe it's mom or dad or both or whatever it might be. And the child develops defense mechanisms to get through. And then usually those defense mechanisms just stay as part of their personality, even when they're no longer in that threatening or abusive or neglectful situation, just how they've learned to adapt and be in the world.
Okay. That is so good to know. I can really just think about a client I had yesterday, in fact, talking about her childhood and like this story of 30 years of trying to heal that and so
Mm-hmm.
frustrated
Mm-hmm.
because has not found a path towards that. I may recommend ketamine therapy for her.
Yeah, ketamine therapy, you're exploring more about complex PTSD and
Mm-hmm.
really and so then when I started to work with folks in the ketamine clinic, I realized, okay, I need another tool to help people even more. And so
Mm-hmm.
then I did somatic experiencing practitioner training, which is the work
Mm-hmm.
of Peter Levine, and that's healing trauma through the body and
Right.
really addresses a lot of the complex PTSD and the nervous system stuff that's happening and getting the nervous system to go into cycles of completion where it finally gets the inputs that it's safe,
Mm-hmm.
because the nervous system just continues to run those old programs of danger,
Right.
essentially. And then when you're in that danger state of mind, literally your frontal cortex, the neocortex, the limbic system isn't working,
Yeah.
which is where you're able to perceive in a normal, relaxed state, like with you and I right now. We both
Mm-hmm.
are grounded and we feel good and we can feel connection and there's a sense of like sameness and what's common amongst us and a generalized ease
Mm-hmm.
that comes from the neocortex. And if you don't have it, you're only looking for what's dangerous, what's bad, what's a threat, what's wrong, what could go wrong.
Yeah. So do you weave in that somatic work also with the ketamine or these separate things?
Together with the ketamine and separate too. Like I'll do work that's just somatic experiencing with
Mm-hmm.
folks and weaving that
Okay.
into the ketamine work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you do so many things. We have a lot. You have a lot of things you could be talking about. And I love this because I recognize this. I am constantly also like, what's the next thing I want to learn and dive
Yeah.
into? It's sort of, I have an insatiable like thirst for expansion. So
Mm-hmm.
I understand how like, oh, I have this beautiful tool. What am I like the next thing that I want to explore that's calling to me? So, and then you also do coaching work.
Yeah.
So you have a coaching practice. So
Mm-hmm.
is your coaching practice mostly like via Zoom? How do you work with your coaching
Yeah,
clients?
Zoom and on the phone. So I got
Mm-hmm.
my master's in I got my bachelor's in psychology and then I have my master's in transpersonal psychology, but I never got licensed as a counselor because I was running a
Okay.
yoga studio
Yeah.
and teaching classes and developing that world more, but my real passion has always been the therapeutic inner transformation.
Right.
And so then I got my coaching to help with that without getting licensed as a therapist. And so
Right.
actually, I kind of love that I'm not bound by therapeutic licensure and I can
Yeah.
work with people in a like more direct and different way than most licensed therapists can, and then bring in all these other modalities for folks too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of folks I'll meet with on Zoom or at the phone, and I kind of find the phone is somewhat nice for certain sets of people because it's more private,
Yeah.
versus
Mm-hmm.
being stared at on a screen.
Right.
But it's like listening and really sensing and attuning, and sometimes I have to stop and ask, like, what just happened right there? And I have to ask them to report to me what they're feeling in their body or what's going on because I can't quite track it, but it
Right.
works really well.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of energy work and I do coaching work also. And before Zoom, it was all over the phone and it
Mm,
was beautiful, where someone doesn't have to get dressed or look a certain way. They can be laying on their couch or however they want to feel totally at ease and comfortable. So even today, when I do Zoom work, I sometimes question, you just sort of invited me to go back to just, like, it's okay to just be on the phone. I feel a
mhm.
pressure to be via Zoom. And I do kind of miss some of those just phone conversations because it is just soul to soul.
Yeah,
And
and
there's
really
no other
listening.
distractions.
No other
Yeah.
distractions, and you're very present because it's
Yeah.
just voice and energy.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to have to sit with that. That's a really, it's almost like you need, like, it feels so old school that, like, oh, can I really do that? But if you're doing it.
I haven't stopped. I haven't stopped doing it.
Okay. So the coaching, the ketamine, you do retreats too. I know you have one coming up in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
So what is this? Tell us about this retreat in Costa Rica that you have coming up.
Well, this one is pretty special because it's funny too with retreats. Retreats are kind of how it got East Forest and I together years
Mm-hmm.
ago too, is because of retreats. I
Okay.
had started working in retreats back in 2008 in Mexico in Teotihuacan and developing the skill of facilitating retreats through that, and then also being a participant in retreats. I would
Mhm.
go and learn too. And so then Krishna and his work with East Forest, he developed East Forest out of guiding private small mushroom ceremonies. And that's what you see in the
Okay.
film at the
Mhm.
farm in the beginning
Yeah.
too.
That's,
Private psilocybin ceremonies.
Nat is back in New York. Is that right?
That's in upstate New York.
Okay.
Yeah. So he started that in 2015, maybe.
Okay.
And then when we came together, we both had the skill set of working with folks
Yeah.
in groups of people. And he would only work privately at the farm, and you see us at one of the retreats in the farm in the movie. Or we would do public retreats like the ones we do at Esalen, or we used to host retreats in Boulder, Utah, which is another part of our story
Mhm.
together. And those, because it's not legal to administer psychedelics, it's a hybrid space where we can't talk about it directly, but it's like if you know, you know, and it's BYOM. And some people are choosing to use medicine in that space and others aren't. And it's a
Mhm.
space where it's overlapping. And we have to have this kind of like gentle, non direct touch, though it's what we're doing is holding medicine space.
Mhm.
So in Costa Rica, it's really special because it's a public mushroom space. We are doing mushrooms, we
Okay.
are administering mushrooms, and anyone from the public, as long as they pass the intakes and the medical backgrounds and those things, can attend.
Okay.
And we did one last year. This was a big step for East Forest coming out in this way and being public. And because part of it is the relationship of the space. People have invited him over the years to hold ceremonies in different places, but he says no. He says no to pretty much everybody
Okay.
because there's a lot that goes into creating the container of it, and he takes it very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And he wants it to go well,
Yeah.
essentially. And part of it is being set up himself as a musician, because he's not just an acoustic musician who plays a drum or strums a guitar or shakes a rattle. He needs a sound system. His music
I
is translated through a sound system.
I don't understand how he does what he does. So I literally, because I've been working with his music for a while, I thought it was a full band.
Mm,
And then to see this one person with all of, like, how does he know what all of these like buttons and pedals and like, and then there's a piano there and there's so much going on. I don't know how your brain would know how to do all that. That's really like blows my mind.
yeah, it's so impressive. It's really impressive that he
Yeah.
does all of that by himself. And he developed that through those early mushroom ceremonies where he was maybe playing a little bit of music and he was a musician and could play the keyboard and things like that. But then it was, oh, I have to hold space for 5 hours. I have to play music for 4 to 5 hours. How do I do that just by myself? He taught himself how to
Oh,
do that over the past 10 years or so. And that's what's developed into East Forest. So he would record those early ceremonies and then take snippets of the songs that were recorded and make them into tracks, songs that were
Mhm.
like 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 3 minutes, and make his albums. And then the yoga world, we latched onto it because it worked for our space too, or the healing world, or the bodywork
Mhm.
world, or the Reiki
Yeah,
world, or the breathwork world.
right.
But they were all medicine songs, all of them. So he's got his craft down. He's so brilliant. It's really
Yeah.
incredible. But what matters to him as a performer now is the sound system. He's very particular. He has a perfectionist mindset. And and to his credit, he wants the translation of what he's doing to be received well by the participants. And if it's through a
Yeah.
bad sound system, they're not going to get the experience that
Right.
he wants to give them.
Well, you saw that in the movie. There was a moment where something happened in one of the events with the sound system,
Mm-hmm.
and there were people saying, "Oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to be okay, and we're going to work with it this way." And he was really clear that it was not okay, and to please not say it's okay because it wasn't okay with him. So that came through in the movie that was so important for him.
That conversation, a type of that conversation, I've been involved with him hundreds of times, where
Okay.
he is not happy with the sound system. And
Okay.
to
Yeah.
his credit, in that moment, he was right.
Yeah.
People complained after that set, not many, but some,
Yeah.
that they were unhappy with what was happening, and he knew exactly what that was.
Yeah. Well, no,
Mm-hmm.
he knows. He knows the frequency, the transmission that he needs to bring forward. And if it's a little bit altered, he can't deliver the correct transmission. So that makes
Exactly.
sense. So
So
this,
Costa
okay.
Rica, they bought him a $10,000 sound system. He said, "These are the
Okay.
specs of what I want and would need. These are the speakers and the system and the subwoofer. If you get this, I will come down." And they said, "Okay."
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. So this event in Costa Rica, he has his sound system.
He has a sound
And
system.
so,
It's a week long on this beautiful beach, Playa Azucar, north of Tamarindo, on this old property that used to be an old hotel. And a hotel, like almost like retreat grounds, not where it's a hotel built up tall, but like little casitas and structures throughout this 40-acre property. So it's
mhm,
got a really beautiful vintage feel to it while it's been
mhm.
updated and modernized as well, because they've reuse this old property. And the facility is beautiful, the food is wonderful, everything we liked. That was like a test. Like, let's go and see if this can work for us to
Mhm.
partner with somebody in this way. And it was incredible. The participants last year all had really just safe, transformational, profound experiences. So we're going back again this year
Okay.
for a second time. And it's February 2nd through the 8th. And it, it's it's the only offering we'll have like that each year, probably. That's a public psilocybin, and there'll be 3 different nights of ceremony, and then during the day I'm leading different practices and helping do prep with all the participants, and the next day
Mhm.
doing integration with the participants, as well as then holding the space while he's performing, while he's doing and holding the ceremony.
So that was another thing that I noticed. It was during some of the live events of you just really holding this beautiful space um, in the movie. So you travel around and you just kind of go to where you feel called to go and hold the energy. To me, it feels very grounding.
Mm.
Um, the energy that you bring, it's like for me watching it and kind of tapping into you a little bit, it just feels sort of like you're a really lovely anchor in some way.
Thank you. Yeah, that is the intention. And it's to be an anchor for him
Hmm.
and an anchor for the field and for all
Yeah.
the folks that are there. So it's both. But doing it in a really subtle way where not much is even spoken to
Hmm.
and there's not much actual direct or hands-on unless really needed. But
Mm.
the whole time, like, and setting up the altar ahead of time and smudging the space and getting like the ambiance of a space where it
Hmm.
needs to be, doing all of that prep work for the space holding, and then just being there.
So that's part of your what you do is you set the stage a little bit.
I do. But again, people don't know that coming to a concert. They think, oh, we're just going to see East Forest. And they do.
Mhm.
And he performs. And then there's a little bit. So when he went from private psilocybin journeys to then like getting drawn into the music world. And he's always been a performer. So he would want to
Mhm.
try and do concerts. So he tried East Forest's concert for a couple years. And a
Mhm.
lot of folks saw him like open up for Trevor Hall back in,
Mhm.
I don't know, 17 or 18 or something like that. And he tried it, but it was always a bit of a struggle. And then around the time that he wanted to go record Ram Dass, he was saying, I want to try to do a hybrid where I'm bringing what I do in the private world into the public space. And we explore that in the documentary on a bigger scale. But before we
Mhm.
got to the tour buses, we would go around to really different yoga studios and different small spaces and begin the ceremony concert. And so I was with him for probably 95% of those. And he wanted to make it beyond just performer on a stage, people watching, and again, those elements of ceremony. So he moved himself into the middle of the room. People would be around him like a mandala, and then he developed these room sprays. So I would go around and I would spray the room at certain times with these scents he developed. And then also he has like a whole, I call them his jangles, but it's like bells and chimes and shakers and rattles. And he would have me go around the space to bring it in more 3D, the sounds while he was playing. So that was kind of synchronized and choreographed too,
Yeah.
of me going through the space with the sounds. But at the same time, what I was also doing was checking on everybody. I'd
Yeah.
move through the space and I'm like eyeballs on where's everybody at in their
Mhm.
journey as they're all lying down, and giving some direct support if needed, but usually just like weaving through and clearing and holding. And then that then became what you see in the film with 500 folks in a room.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about during that too was, as it started to get bigger, I said, we have to have more people than me. Because the odds of it going sideways for someone increases, or more than one person in this space that
Right.
we're holding really on the edge of
Yeah.
holding medicine space publicly, doing it but not doing it kind of thing. And he agreed. And so I said, well, when we do the ceremony concert, I'm going to find support in different cities. So I connected with this network of psychedelic ketamine therapists,
Mhm.
facilitators. In every city we went to, I pulled in 4 to 5 to 6 psychedelic therapists, and I would train them before each show of like, this
Wow.
is how we hold the space, and these are our protocols, and this is how we work with people.
Mhm.
And then they would position themselves throughout the room. And we would let people know we have support here for you just in case you
Yeah.
need it. And so every show we did that, just in case, just in case. And the very last show, someone finally came up and asked one of our sitters for support, and they came and got me to be with them. And it was actually someone who was totally sober, and they were just having this overwhelming opening of tears and cathartic release, and just like, I don't even know what's happening or why, but all this stuff is coming up. And I was like, okay. So we worked with that.
Yeah.
And so having just the safety in the container is important to me. I don't want to be
Yeah.
careless or thoughtless or cavalier. Like I
Mhm.
said, I come with a lot of humility for the power of these medicines, and I'm always going to hold that. Anything could happen at any time.
Yeah. Um, so that piece, I just want to come back to a little bit, how it ended up being the person that was sober that had the breakthrough, because you'll see that, in doing healing work, sometimes it's not, you just are barely touching somebody, right?
Mm,
And they can have a huge emotional release and they just need someone to be with them. So I would imagine that being in the energy of that room with that music being played, with the smells, that could actually like, very easily have someone have a huge like emotional release.
it
So
happened.
yeah. And I love that you have enough people there so it is so safe and held.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an important piece for me. There was only one time early on, maybe midway through, I want to say early on, but it was like with John Hopkins, who the Music for Psychedelic Therapy album had just come out, and he was promoting that, and there was the
Mhm.
Ram Dass track with East Forest, Sit Around the Fire. And that's the one and only time Krishna's used recorded Ram Dass. So we
Okay.
got done with the Ram Dass album, and the Love Serve Remember Foundation, they loved it. Now there's a lot more music with Ram Dass that's out, but it's all pre-recorded Ram Dass.
Mhm.
And they wanted him to do another song, and we sat with it for years, just like listening and waiting and listening and trying to find the right piece. And finally, that talk that's in Sit Around the Fire
Mhm.
came across, and we're like, this is one that this is going to be the one.
Okay.
And sent it to John Hopkins, and he made it into the gorgeous song that it is today. That's so powerful.
Yeah.
So it was a tour for that, and we were in LA, and it was like East Forest superposition that makes ambient music for this space too, and John Hopkins listening to the full album.
Mhm.
And that was the first time I was like, wow, this is a lot. That was maybe like 300. I was like, I feel nervous about this space. And it wasn't really our space because it was
Mhm.
this combined event. So I didn't really feel like I could hold it in the way that I'd like to because it wasn't just us. But I still made the altar, and I still tried to smudge, and I was still there, and I was doing the scents and the sounds. And there was one person standing up. And first I was like, that's okay. Just I'm keeping an eye on him. Maybe he'll sit down in a moment. And then I did another pass through the room, and he was getting louder and louder. And I was like, all right. So I just
Okay.
whoop, like went right over to him and just looked at him, and I was like, hey, you want to sit down with me? And he was just like, yes. And so I sat with him right there in the room for a while he was saying things like, I just love East Forest. I want to go up on my stage and hug him right now and let him know. I'm like, nope, not going to do that. We're just going to sit right here and let's breathe together, and, getting him through it. And he could stay in the
Yeah.
space because he was redirectable. He was
Okay.
listening to me and with me. If he were combative or argumentative, we would have had to have taken him out.
Right.
We've always had a plan for if that were to be the case with
Yeah.
someone, and it's never been the case. It really isn't. Krishna likes to call in, or East Forest likes to call in, gentle power, which I appreciate. Gentle power.
Okay. Gentle power. Okay. So you have a plan. I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
grounded enough to know that you need a backup plan just in case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because again, I don't want to take anything for granted. Or
Yeah.
I feel like the second I think, oh, nothing's going to happen, is when it will.
Yeah. Okay, so all of this work you do, there's one more piece that you have a studio that you also run on top of all of this. You also have a studio in Boise.
Yeah.
And I know you do a lot of yoga nidra. Do you do more than like what? Tell me about the studio a little
Well, the
bit.
studio I opened after moving to Boise. I moved here in 2009. In 2010, I opened the studio in downtown Boise, Sage
Okay.
Yoga and Wellness. And I had
Mhm.
it as like a full, like 4,000 square foot studio with teachers and classes and body work and PT and men and women locker rooms and boutiques and like the whole huge like complex. Yoga teacher trainings, workshops, all of it. And I thought, I will this is so rooted in the community and so
Mhm.
strong and really successful. It's always going to be here.
Right.
And I just opened in end of 2019, early 2020, a little sister studio called Source Meditation Space that was right
Mhm.
next to Sage. That was a studio dedicated to meditation and kirtan and sound healing and breath work and more like group process work, things like that. So I had this little studio and then Sage that had been there forever. And 2020 happened,
Yeah.
and life with studios really got altered. And I tried to make it work for a number of months, doing first just online and then
Right.
hybrid, but social distancing, but still Zooming. And I could see then, or I felt in those early stages of 2020 pandemic, I didn't have a sense that this is going to be over soon and we'll be back to normal. It was, this is
Mhm.
going to go on for a while and really alter things.
Yeah.
And I was in a tough position because my whole business had changed and everything had come to this halt. And I had a really big overhead with the studio.
4,000 square feet. Yeah.
Yeah, really big overhead. And so into the summer of 2020, I finally made the decision I'm going to have to close Sage. I'm going to have to close the studio because of my work with my landlord too. Like he wasn't willing to, do rent forgiveness or things like that. Like
Mhm.
some places were that you'd be able
Right.
to like write it out. If I tried to write it out, I'd have a lot of debt, a lot of debt. And so I had to make the tough decision to close Sage, but then I kept Source. I kept the smaller studio
Mhm.
because it was just fresh and I had two partners with it and it was way less overhead and just like
Mhm.
super easy to just kind of keep by itself. So I had to close Sage, which was really heartbreaking. And I feel like for our community, it felt like the first death of someone that we knew really well,
Mm.
losing that
Yeah.
community space,
Yeah. Sort of
especially so
an anchor point in the community.
anchor point in the
Yeah.
community. And like I said, I never anticipated that I wouldn't have it. But then coincidentally, the same month that I had to close the studio was the same month that I started working with the Boise Ketamine Clinic.
Oh,
And I hadn't tried to align anything in that way. It
yeah.
just one door opened while the other was
Yeah.
closing. And so now, 4 years later, Source, my two partners have left it, and I just have that space now on my own. And I renamed it Sage, and I call it like
Okay.
the little sister of Sage Yoga and Wellness. So I have
Mhm.
this studio space that's really lovely, but a lot smaller. It's only like 1,200 square feet,
Mhm.
and it fits maybe like 20 mats,
Okay.
and I'll lead meditation there. Right now, I'm leading like a drop in pranayama and meditation class, or I'll do breath work, or I'll lead a yoga practice. I love yoga nidra so much, but I haven't actually led a straight yoga nidra class in a while.
I haven't been, I love taking a yoga nidra class, and it's been years, honestly, since I've sort of allowed myself the luxury of going back into one. This is
Mm-hmm.
really inspiring me to go find one here in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, there's a lot of
It's a
great teachers
beautiful.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom, back in 2002, she did her yoga teacher training also, and she learned yoga nidra from her lineage and brought it back to me. And I've always woven it in all these 20 plus years of teaching. I would just always lead a really long shavasana. My shavasana at the end of my
Mhm.
yoga class would be like 15 minutes through a yoga nidra
Okay.
script.
Oh, it's the best part, having 15 minutes of shavasana. That's perfect for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that is inspiring me to like allow myself back into that space a little bit more because it is beautiful.
Notice too, to your point, Christine, about yoga nidra, I only learned this a couple months ago, was that the same brainwave state, the delta brainwave state, is the same in yoga nidra as it is in ketamine therapy. And what I work with a lot in ketamine therapy is people's intentions. And I'll start and I have them in a short, concise, clear, positively stated way. Let me know what their intention is for the therapy. And then I'm implanting that affirmation all throughout it and reminding them of that intention as they're in that deep delta brainwave state, just like yoga nidra is doing.
Okay, that I didn't know it was a delta state, but that's what I do when I start to work with someone. We have an aligned intention always, because I think also the power of our aligned intention, just energetically, it just amplifies it so much, the transformation that can happen with that.
Yeah. Or you
So
as the amplifier,
yeah, that
right?
intention is so powerful. And then I noticed too, like I told you I have this divine DJ or the spirit shuffle, and we'll typically have an aligned intention. And then I have these decks of oracle decks, and there's probably 800 cards. And so many times, like I'll just feel what deck you need and okay, let's see what your message is. I can't tell you how often it's something related to that intention that
Mm-hmm.
you started with. There's no way that you could find, I could even go through it and pull the perfect card at the perfect time. It's spirit driven. It's you, like you're driven, but it's like that energy affirms the work that you've done with that intention
Mm-hmm.
in some way. So it makes me so excited to hear that's how you work also.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It is so powerful. It is so powerful, that aligned intention. And you and I clearly could talk about so many of these things for so long, but I love Lynn McTaggart. Do you know who Lynn McTaggart is?
Mm-mm.
She's a woman, I forget her background, but she has these power of eight groups. And essentially, it's like the power of having eight people come together with that aligned intention. So you can have your own little healing groups,
Mm.
and then you do healing for, maybe you find your own power of eight group, and then each person will have like their intention, and then everyone amplifies that for them.
Amazing.
So yeah, it's beautiful.
What's her name? I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, Lynn McTaggart. And I think it's such a beautiful practice. They've actually, scientifically, they've done work to see how it actually works. There's a man at the University of Arizona named Gary Schwartz, and he has a whole like parapsychology department. He's from like the Ivies. I mean, he's well educated, and he has this sort of parapsychology department at the University of Arizona. So what she worked with him, and they set up these intention experiments where in Australia. So these people are, around the world, and they have two different plants in Australia. And one is they're given the same light, same food, same fertilizer, everything else, but like plant A gets the healing intention energy, and plant B gets nothing. And how the plant A flourished and thrived, they started documenting, and it's not just one experiment. There's more.
Mm.
So I always love getting into the science underneath, because I find it fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So she's actually has some science underneath this work. It's not just all kind of out there esoteric.
Great. Great. I
So
can't wait to dive in. Thank
yeah,
you.
you can check it out. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I'm so, just like, from my heart, I'm so grateful
Mm.
that you've taken this time to come and share your story and your wisdom, and mostly just your presence. Being here in this space and time. I know if I'm in Boise, I'm definitely going to try to come and take a class from you. It may even be worth a road trip to come and take a yoga nidra class from you, or your retreat in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I love that.
what are the best ways for people to find you and connect with you?
Oh, probably my website, which is marisaradhaweppner.com, or on Instagram, which is the same, Marisa Radha Weppner.
Okay.
Those are the easiest, I would say, to connect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then on Spotify or the different listening platforms, I do have an album called Guidance, which
Mm-hmm.
is an intro to meditation track, and then there's a healing and grounding track, a heart opening track, and a yoga nidra track, all with
Okay.
East Forest music.
So I started listening to that last night because I was like, oh, we're getting ready. We're getting ready to I want to like feel into your energy, and like that's such a great way through someone's voice. And so I listened to the first two tracks. They're beautiful. I highly recommend. I was listening to it just driving in the car, and I was thinking, wow, this is such a beautiful practice, especially for someone who has, anxiety driving or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. It's just very calming. So like I found this, just driving it, listening to the car, I felt so relaxed. I felt so good listening to it on the way in today. So I highly recommend Guidance. I know when I went to look it up and I typed in Guidance on Spotify, it didn't come up immediately, because I think there were several things that showed Guidance, and I'm trying to remember how I actually found it.
Maybe my
I may have
name.
I think I put in Guidance and Radha, and then
Yeah.
it came up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And if you go to my website, there'll be a link to the album in one of the tabs.
okay.
So that's there too. Yep. And then on Spotify, I have too, if you were to find my profile as a listener, I think I have like a whole playlist of meditations. So those are there. But I used to have a podcast too, and I would put out meditations through it. So those extra meditations are there. Krishna East Forest, his meditations are there, and then other meditations that I just really like are there. It's a big playlist. It's called Meditations.
1000% that's being downloaded once we get off the phone. That's amazing. And we didn't, last little piece, you're a facilitator at Esalen, which is a like beautiful place in California. So, I mean, we didn't even talk about everything. We're an hour and 20 minutes in, like, beautiful medicine, beautiful transformation and awakening that you're bringing to the
Thank
planet. I just
you.
deeply honor you for the work you're
Yeah,
doing.
thank you. And it's fun to hear that you saw me in the movie because I feel like while I'm there, I don't really say that much. My presence is kind of like there or in the background or in a space you'll see me with East Forest. But yeah, it's an interesting experience for me to be in the movie, but also feel like I'm not quite in the movie, but I am, but I'm not. Even how my role about in even how it came about that I have a role in the movie was like non-directional also. So
Okay.
I appreciate that you feel like, oh, I saw you there. Because at times I'm
Well,
like, I don't even know what people think of this.
I went with some girlfriends to see it. And I mean, of course, the music is like so healing, so powerful, so beautiful. But we all were commenting on one, like, oh, she's so like beautiful. But it was like, what a beautiful being and that
Hmm.
presence. So the three of us as women were really locked into you.
Wow. Oh, that's really
So
sweet. That's really
yeah, we
sweet.
all, and I told them, I said, oh, guess who I'm interviewing? They were like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing.
Aw, I love that.
So, yes, maybe you don't recognize it, but you're definitely like your energy is felt
Hmm.
throughout it,
Hmm.
right? So it didn't necessarily need the words because energy is more powerful than words, I think, a lot, and you could feel that just incredible like groundedness that you brought to all of it.
Hmm. Thank
So,
you. Yeah, that would be my intention.
well, good.
Because then
Well,
we can expand, ground, then
yes.
expand.
Exactly. Both are possible. Like you need to be, we're here on this planet, on this earth for a reason. So being magnetized, feeling anchored, feeling connected, embodied,
Hmm.
and then reaching out into these higher aspects of ourself. So I see the divine balance between the two of you.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. I'm
So
so grateful. So grateful for the partnership and happy that the film is out in the world and it's in theaters now, but you'll be able to watch it online. I think towards the end of November, it'll be up on a website for the folks that couldn't make it to a theater. They can stream it online. There'll be some additional like educational content and bundles that you can get with it too, which is
that's
exciting.
that is great because it sold out here really quickly. I had people who I was telling people about it. I'm like, this is a one shot deal. Like, you want to go because there's one show. And so then people were reaching out to me like, oh, do you still have that ticket? And I was like, no, 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 no. I never had a ticket for you. I was telling you to go get the ticket, but they were sold out. So that's great that there's now an opportunity to.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Coming up soon.
yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, perfect. I want to watch it again. So thank you so much.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it. All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you,
Have a
Christine.
beautiful day.
You too.
Okay. Bye bye.